Hi, Jeff Bridgman here in York County, Pennsylvania. I'd like to talk to you today about a really terrific graphic, three-dimensional women's suffrage object. This is an umbrella, or a parasol if you like, made in 1913 or beginning in 1913 by the National American Women's Suffrage Association, headquartered in New York City. It was commissioned by them, and to really understand it and where they came from, I'd like to turn back the clock a little bit to tell you a story about suffrage. So in 1851, Susan B. Anthony met Elizabeth Cady Stanton in upstate New York in Seneca Falls at a abolitionist meeting. And not long after that, during the Civil War in 1863, they actually started, the two women who became close friends and worked together steadily on abolitionist things, started a petition to end slavery. After the war, in 1868, they began to work on the issue of suffrage. And in that year, they started a newspaper called The Revolution. But it was really the next year, in 1869, when things really changed on the suffrage landscape. So a Union Civil War veteran named William Bright, who was a police officer and a Mason in New York City after the war, invested what he had in gold and went to the West and became rich. He moved to Wyoming, and he opened a saloon there with hopes to get elected to public office. He was a staunch Democrat, even though he was a Unionist, and Grant had just entered the White House in 1868, Republican. So there was a Republican-appointed governor in Wyoming, which was not yet a state, by the way. It's just a territory at the time. But Bright worked his way onto the council of the state, basically its legislature, and he was able to actually introduce a bill in Wyoming that was the first one ever in American history to allow women to vote. In that very same year, Susan B. Anthony and Elizabeth Cady Stanton start something called the National Women's Suffrage Association. And at the very same time, another organization got legs underneath it in 1869 again, called the American Women's Suffrage Association. These two groups in the beginning were sort of at odds with one another, maybe a little jealous of one another even, and did not work together. But years later, Lucy Stone, who had started the American Women's Suffrage Association, decided it was really important to try to marry the two together, and her daughter really spearheaded negotiations. In the same year, coincidentally, that Wyoming became a state in 1890, the two big suffrage organizations merged to become, and it's quite a mouthful, the National American Women's Suffrage Association. That's why the name is so long. It combined the National and the American Women's Suffrage Association into one group. The newly formed organization was officially led by Elizabeth Cady Stanton, but Susan B. Anthony did most of the work. During the 1890s, these two women were elderly, so they were prepping two different women who would lead the organization in the future. That was Carrie Chapman Catt, who took over in 1900, and Anna Howard Shaw, who took the helm in 1904. All of these women, huge names in suffrage. And it was Anna Howard Shaw who still led the organization in 1913 when these umbrellas were produced. Now, some of the other umbrellas talked about and known are purple and white and green, or just white. Some are English, and some are American, using the English colors. These are traditional American colors. What's fun about this are a couple of things. One, there's actually a picture of one of these being carried in 1914 in August in Rochester, New York. Let me show you quick. So here they are. Here are the women in the parade marching down Main Street in Rochester. Suffragettes carrying, look, in the front is a woman carrying one of these umbrellas, and we know from the museum in Rochester that all down the middle, women are carrying that type of umbrella in yellow and white, and on the outside, they're carrying solid color umbrellas. And look in the background, there is a burlesque club sign right top and center. I'm sure that wasn't lost on the photographer and that he chose this spot to photo them. I don't think he was in favor of the women's movement. Also, if you can see, if you can look at their faces, they're masked to hide their identity. It was on this day that Anna Howard Shaw came to speak in Rochester, and so that's what the festivities are all about. Curiously enough, this is very close to where Elizabeth Cady Stanton and Susan B. Anthony met in Seneca Falls, not even an hour away. So these parasols or umbrellas were actually marketed in women's magazines of the time by the organization to raise money. They were sold for, guess how much? $1 a piece. They were $1. And you could get a dozen of them for $10. So probably these were being sold by the hundreds through the 19 teens, because parades were growing in number for suffragettes. They were huge rallies. And these were one of the most graphic things that you could carry down the street in a parade. As you can see, this is much easier than carrying a sign. And for $1, you had a really great advertising object for the suffrage movement. And women were also hoped to be carrying these when they went to clubs, when they went to outdoor retreats in upstate New York, when they went to the beach, etc., so that the word would be out there everywhere. Somehow, however, almost none of these survive. There are 3 others in this exact form with states painted, the names of states painted here in the yellow fields as you go around. There's one for Oregon, which I've held. A very good friend of mine owned it for years. There's another for Idaho, and there's another for Alaska. Now, the problem with those is that they're sort of pigeonholed to those particular states. So you'd have to have a collector that either lived in one of those states, or you'd have to just have an old-time collector where they really bought anything like that at one time. It didn't matter. But collecting really isn't like that today. So it's not good to get pigeonholed into one state necessarily, depending on what state it is. If it's New York, that's easily saleable. If it's New Jersey, that's pretty saleable. And you get the idea. So I feel that I probably own here really what's best of all the suffrage umbrellas that exist anywhere that I know of, without being pigeonholed into a particular state. So thanks for tuning in here to watch and learn a little bit about the suffrage movement. And I hope that you found this interesting, and give me a call if you want to acquire this. Thanks.